Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Smart City Talk. For today, we'll be happy to have Dr. Kijin Seong to give us talk on smart and resilient cities, mitigating the risk of climate change. Dr. Kijin Seong is a postdoctoral researcher fellow in School of Architecture at the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on smart city framework for climate resilience. She is interested in disaster resilience, hazard mitigations, and climate change adaptations and environmental equities. She completed her PhD in urban and regional science at Texas A&M University, where she focused on post-disaster relocations, floodplain. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Kijin Seong.
Hi. Yeah, I'm so honored to have this opportunity to share today's presentation, and thanks Weijia for inviting me here today. As Weijia introduced me, my name is Kijin Seong, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow in Urban Information Lab at UT Austin. I'm working with Dr. Junfeng Zhao, specifically focusing on smart city and sustainable environment. And my research area is a smart city framework for the climate resilience, disaster resilience, and hazard mitigation and climate change adaptation, and also the environmental equity. And today, I'll talk about the smart and resilient city and how to mitigate the risk of climate change through the innovative technologies. So during my PhD, my research has been primarily focused on the disaster resilience. And since I joined the Urban Information Lab in January, I had a thorough curiosity of how data-driven smart city framework and innovative technologies can be integrated with the climate resilience concept. So this presentation has been initiated from my ongoing research questions. So yeah, let's get started. You know, change is constant, and its quickened pace defines our time. Technology keeps moving forward at extremely fast speed, while the world population grows by more than 200,000 people every day. As a result, challenging issues are emerging that demand some solutions, such as what could more equitable economic models look like, and how we can decouple growth from the negative impact of human capacity and human activities. And will supply always meet demand? Climate change, perhaps the most serious and urgent challenges and issues facing all life on our planet. It underscores the pressing needs of swifter actions. And we all know that the consequences of further global warming cannot be overstated. This is the aerial photo that shows the homes and businesses destroyed by the tornado on December 11, 2021 in Mayfield, Kentucky. So at that time, multiple tornadoes touched down in several Midwestern states and caused some widespread disruptions, leaving an estimated 70 people dead. So devastated weather events getting hit urban areas more frequently, we should ask and frame how we can approach to climate change with certain questions like what should we do to reduce such extreme disaster events, or what can be done to protect world's coastal populations from rising sea levels, or when will renewable energy power the world, how will we feed an additional 2 billion citizens by 2050? And new technologies will continue to drive innovations. So possible solutions to host host of the global challenges are here, from energy projections and storage to the mobility and the healthcare. And powerful drivers are shaping our collective futures, and it is critical in our some fast-moving times to stop and think about what futures we are shaping and what we are creating every day through our actions. I think these are the key questions for the climate change. When it comes to the cities only cover 3% of our planet. And yet, cities effectively provide a home for 50% of global population, which is to increase to 75% by 2050. Cities are already struggling to mitigate the problems caused by some increased population density. And these problems are expected to intensify with other variables, such as the climate change and the extreme weather events. So to prepare for the future, cities must improve their climate change resilience to improve the quality of life of its citizens. And needless to say, what we see in many global cities is overcrowding, waste pollutions, and the traffic congestions. So if we want to continue enjoying life in cities and not live in the gridlock urban slums, then the cities have to become more efficient and sustainable. So cities have to be smarter. That's why city needs smart city framework to improve the resilience. The concept of leveraging the new technologies within a smart city environment improves and accelerate the governing, economic, social, and environmental decision-making alongside the delivery of services to enhance the benefits of the people. And the city that can detect, adapt, and respond to changes in its environment will produce some smart solutions to the layers, resulting in some resilience and also providing more intelligent services. Also, cities can share resources and knowledge and give support to each other through the smart city infrastructure. And the collaborations accelerates the progression of the services and the digital governing. So it will also make it easy to help each other in an emergency situation, making them more robust and resilient. So in this context, we need to look at what is the resilient smart city, how those two concepts could be integrated in practice. First, what makes a resilient city? By resilient, the very renowned scholar Newman, Beatley, and Boyer defines it by cities that can last and make it through the crisis, processing inner strength and resolve, as well as appreciate the urban forms and physical infrastructure. And when we think about in reality, we can easily understand two types of shocks in cities. The first one is the acute shocks that are more like the sudden, sharp events that threaten the cities. So earthquake, flood, COVID-19, and some terrorist attacks are all the examples of acute shocks. On the other hand, chronic stresses are something that weaken the fabric of the city on a daily or some cyclical basis. For example, high unemployment, overtaxed, or some inefficient public transportation systems, endemic violence, and chronic food or water shortages, or some extreme heat events those are all the examples of chronic stresses. Generally, urban resilience is defined as the ability of cities, communities, and households to adapt to the changing conditions and to withstand the shocks and chronic stresses while maintaining some essential functions. At the urban system level, the 4 stages of continuum include some awareness, coping, adapting, and the transforming. First, awareness raises at several levels within an urban system to identify some risk and the shocks in a timely way. And second, coping systems can withstand some shocks and provide some essential functions, allowing for some recovery over time. And third, adapting system shifts allows the urban systems to observe and withstand the spectrum of shocks and chronic stresses while maintaining the essential functions and enabling faster recovery based on the past experiences. And finally, transforming the policies and investments are adapted so that the urban systems can observe and avert shocks and stresses while developing. So transformative behavior includes some multi-use infrastructure and risk-sensitive land use planning and cohesive social policies that actually not obtained through the daily routine. The resilient smart city is a combination of the 2 concepts, smart city and the resilient city. So there are more than 30 definitions of a smart city. And I brought one of the definitions referring that we believe the city to be smart when the investment in human and social capital and traditional and modern communication infrastructure fuel the sustainable economic growth and high quality of life. On the other hand, the first appearance of the concept resilience in connection with the urban policy dates back to 2002. In contrast to smart city, the number of definitions in resilient city is actually quite limited. As we saw in the previous slide, cities who can call themselves resilient climb to build capacity within individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. So the concept of hazard in resilient has been broadened to include some external pressures in general, varying from the climate change and environmental degradations to the poverties or even some traffic congestions. And also the concept smart city has been evolved. The evolution comes from the deployment of ICT as a key tool to fuel the economic growth to multi-objective and some participatory strategies capable to tackle problems of some environmental deteriorations and social equity or inclusions and building some social capital. So as you see, now the definitions of a smart and resilient city and of characteristics attributed to each of these concepts are now very much overlapped. So taking into account the convergence of those 2 definitions, both smart and resilient cities are building some capabilities to deal with the chronic stresses and the acute shocks, deploying broad ranges of technologies. And they enabled individuals and communities to participate in the definitions and executions of the policies. Another important part I'd like to talk today is a smart city framework for the disaster resilience. How do smart cities react to disaster? And what factors are needed for the effective responsive cities? I think those kinds of questions should be answered. Given the increase of the disaster events, the government's role in disaster management are getting important. So based on the federal and state disaster management system, they basically have the four broad components, including the mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And new technologies can help to enhance the resilience. The dark boxes suggest some sub-components of disaster management and resilience, which provides some opportunity to use big data at a proper time and places. For example, at the preparedness and mitigation stage, the damage to climate change can be reduced by effective detections and monitoring system for some abnormality of weather or disaster probability. And at the response stage, climate change affected areas faces many problems as such as the lack of the communications, lack of some coordinations between the rescue team, and the lack of some stakeholder awareness. So some disaster usually causes some damages to some local resources that also create some barriers to the post-disaster management. These barriers can be easily solved actually by using some big data analytics. For example, disconnected mobile network in some affected areas can be solved by using some area ad hoc network that ensures some connectivities among users of affected areas. So this slide more clearly shows how smart city framework can be applied to distinct phase of disaster risk management for resilience infrastructure system. So first, the early sections is benefiting from the recent advancement of ICT, and the use of early warning system is shown in the preparedness phase, and also collections and analysis of real-time hazard information for effective coordinations of disaster management and recovery operations during the disaster period. And also the setting up some long-term monitoring system during the post-disaster states can be also shown. At a global and regional and also the national scale, some advanced informations and communication technologies can have been some implemented for the generations and distributions of disaster alert and the warnings. And this is an overview of some data-driven dynamical complex systems approach to disaster resilience. So basically, big data enables observations of post-disaster recovery dynamics at the high spatial and temporal loss of information. And it captures some various characteristics of disaster resilience process, and recovery predictions and insights obtained from the dynamical models can be used for some evaluating policy impacts and assessing the resilience of the urban systems to counterfactual disaster event scenarios, which really helps optimize decision-making for communities. Compared to some conventional data source, like field surveys, satellite imageries, archived some databases, one of the potential data source for disaster management is IOT-based sensors. IoT-based sensor provides some multidimensional data that can help in collecting the required information, and IoT-driven platform also provides some disaster management systems, such as the early warning systems with some time critical and also scalable services. And another emerging but yet underused big data sources for the disaster management is social media. A smart city may need to consider social media to enhance the communication between the citizens and acquire some feedbacks and encourage empowerment between the citizens and some institutions. And next, we're going to look at how disaster management system can utilize the smart city digital twin framework for the climate resilience. A smart city digital twin relies on a number of layers of data that build on top of each other, layering in some information about the terrain, buildings, infrastructure, mobility, and IoT services, IoT devices. And digital twin uses the data generated in the smart city to perform additional simulations about the mobility optimization and building placement of or some design of the renewable energy. For example, installing the offshore wind turbines. This information is then fed back through the layers of the model where it is implemented in the real world, in the physical world. And this model shows the minimum combination of the components and information flows for smart city digital twin to effectively support the community disaster management. The model also shows how the lesson learned from the smart city digital twin can be used to improve decision making and the sensor capability of the digital twin itself. Basically, the model has the three principal components. First one is the components that are not part of the smart city digital twin itself, but are impacted either directly by the smart city digital twin or through the lessons learned from the smart city digital twin. And the second part is the smart city component, and the third part is the digital twin components. So some of the model components outside the city, smart city or the digital twin connects the smart city digital twin to the community and the disaster events, and includes some community conditions, community features, and the characteristics and lessons learned from the community simulation model and the digital image tools. And also the management decision directly impact the community features and characteristics with respect to the timing and capacity of the communities. And now let's move on to look at some real-world cases for the disaster resilience using some smart city framework. People developed some open source real-time some earthquake earning systems, and also improved the detections and characterizations of the earthquake through the machine learning. And also solar power generation systems and storage batteries provides some smart energy grid that connects some every buildings to a central real-time energy network. So, as the disaster planning is of the paramount importance in Japan, so they developed these kinds of energy systems that have been designed and generated and also stored enough the power for 3 days in the disaster period. And also this is the case that the smart city energy grid system is applied for the disaster preparedness. And another real-world practice is an on-the-ground flooding mapping and response system developed by the researchers at UT Austin and also the TACC. They actually created some mobile application called Pinted Flood, which will help some policers, firefighters, and the EMS better respond to the flooding disasters on the scene. So during the major flooding events, firefighters and police officers on the ground will be able to use the smartphones or some devices to place a digital pin on the map to mark the boundary of the water's edge. So that really has not been applied in the practice. So that's a really innovative technology now. And now I'm now nearing the end of the presentation. So to wrap up, supported by the evidence-based decision of smart city, and the some development of the smart city requires some feedback from the resilient city practice. And I hope this presentation really inspires you about how smart city and resiliency complements some practice and also the application.
Thanks, Dr. Song. I think you have some internet problem at the end. So
at the end, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So thank you very much. I think it's very nice talk. So we will post it later.